All right, so we have a couple of items for today's call. Um, I'll start. I wrote the initial MP3 draft with a lot of not with not a lot of markdown formatting, so it's kind of plain and it's much smaller than what I was originally going to do because it was just too much fluff in that. But there's um, if you have a chance to read it, please look at it and provide feedback. The I mean, the general idea is that there's three stages we identified in that document. The first one is on how to build, how we're going to document and build the process for building a kernel from scratch that just has VirtIO drivers and nothing else. Um, and there's some work items identified there. The second stage is once you have like a QCOW image from that build, or a QCOW image that's provided to you by a vendor. Um, what are the next things you have to do, and that's like created the Antidote user account and um, possibly installing packages or running scripts or putting like a license file on the image, something like that. Um, and then the third stage is basically anything that the big thing about stage two is anything that requires the internet needs to happen at stage two. Um, so stages one and two are what'll happen for the nightly build, right? The images get built. Um, a Docker image is made from that, and then it's put into our Docker Hub repository. Um, After that is stage three, and that's what happens to the image at the time that it's spun up for a lesson, and it's the final part of the preparation, and that would be just configuration, since there is no internet access for any of the images at the time that they boot, which is something we'd like to maintain as a you know as a as a principle, no internet access for the images inside the lessons. um, and so there's three ways to do that. There's when they're spun up for a lesson via Napalm, pushing a config via Napalm, um, pushing or using Python, just running a Python script. And then the last thing is uh, using an Ansible playbook. And there's going to be things that are pretty common to each of those methods. Like, for instance, with Napalm, it's not a config merge; it's a config, just a config write. So there's things that you'll have to maintain inside of that configuration, like the Antidote username and password, and you know things like that. So that could probably be automated in some way. The and same with the Python module. If the purpose of the Python module is to copy files over, we could probably, instead of having everyone write from scratch their own way of connecting to the box and then copying the files over, we could probably come up with a helper module in Python that would allow them to do it. Um, that kind of thing, and probably reusable Ansible playbooks for similar tasks. So there's plenty of work items in that MP3 doc if anyone wants to, and it's basically going to be the thing I spend most of my time on. Um, it's not too complicated. It's not nearly as complicated as MP1. So I think we should be able to knock this one out pretty quick. Like, I project way too far into the future, but I'll say I think we should have that feasibly done by the document and an example done by the end of Q1, which is plenty of time. Hopefully sooner. Are there any questions?
I have a question on that. I'm not as familiar with running images, Q, uh, QCOW2 images, you can run them with Docker. Is that correct? Like you still have a Docker file?
Yes. So well, since the platform is Linux, right? In production,
Correct.
a QCOW2 image is functionally equivalent to like a VMware VMDK file.
Correct.
And it's QEMU that runs QEMU is a hypervisor. QEMU/KVM is the hypervisor that we run, which is in production, which is equivalent to something like VMware or Zen or Hyper-V. So and QCOW2 is the native format of QEMU KVM. So we'll have to like if the image comes to us from a vendor that's not in that format, we'll have to convert it to that format to run in production. And then so what we're doing is we're running QEMU inside of a container. That's
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, so it's kind of like the KubeVirt that Overjix Olivier posted, correct?
Yeah, in fact, there's a couple competing projects, KubeVirt and Firecracker, and I think there's a third one that does these. It's the whole concept behind them is the same. There's a project called Firecracker that
Yep.
that they call it a micro VM, and it's basically they're running VMs in containers, but they're because you only need VirtIO, they do a custom kernel build, which is what our goal should be, is to do that, and that ends up with, instead of a 3 gig image file that you're putting inside of a Docker file, you end up with like somewhere between 2 and 300 meg image file. And it runs, and because there's no initRD, and because it's so small, when it occupies like 30 megs of RAM, and it boots nearly instantly, like in less than a second. And that's the whole idea behind all of those things.
Okay. Good.
I don't know if we'll actually use KubeVirt or Firecracker, mainly because some of the plumbing underneath is we're already running VMs inside of containers, and we already have a pattern for stitching all the networking together, which is really the hard part. And I so I don't know if moving to KubeVirt makes sense. I mean, maybe we will in the future, but if we can get to the point of having micro VMs with our current platform, it'll benefit us two ways. One, obviously things will move faster, use a lot less resources, and so on. But also, if we do make that jump to one of those platforms, it'll be a lot easier.
Okay. So it shouldn't change self-medicate at all, because we're already running the VQFX as the VMs, correct?
Yeah. That's, in fact, that's the whole idea. what you just said.
It's self-medicate should actually become way better because the number of big ass heavy VMs that we should be required to run inside of it should be standardized and hopefully reduced. One thing that's not part of MP3 is Derek and I have been having internal conversations, putting the Juniper hat on a little bit because we contributed the VQFX image. It's possible that we can actually replace nearly all of the existing lessons that use the VQFX with something that's even more lightweight that still does the job. We don't have to compromise on functionality at all, but it's not running like a full-blown operating system. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can make the experience not only for users of the site but also for people that are building lessons a lot easier. And MP3 is one of them, and then there's a few other things that we've got going on that we want to improve. So
good. Okay. And with working on, I've been trying to do Packer builds for self-medicate, and I haven't decided on putting those VMs, the Docker, preloading the images into self-medicate or not. But that's the the task that takes the longest amount of time is those 600 meg. I think they're each 600 meg VQFX images. Maybe they're 800. They take forever to Docker pull. Hours in my case. Yeah.
Yeah. Hours. Where do you live?
In the sticks. I have Suddenlink, which is a cable provider, so I have 400 meg download. But I can speed test at 400 on a good day. But for whatever reason, I think I may have downloaded too many Docker images. Whatever the case is, either Docker's throttling me or Suddenlink's throttling me. But I get about 1 meg a minute on the VQFX images.
Oh man. Oh wow. I wonder if there's a way to proxy that. There's got to be a way to proxy that. Hey Matt, do you know how the Docker hub name is usually like the repository / name?
What do you mean?
Like inside of our lessons, if you look at the Docker hub name of the image, it's usually antidote lab / something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a totally pass through from the lesson definition, which includes antidote lab / utility, for instance. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a way that we could make that a little more flexible, where if you don't specify the any Docker image name that doesn't have the first part, like a first part /, you could specify a default to put in there, so that Stephen could, and then not just Stephen, but anyone who doesn't necessarily have the best internet, which is, by the way, a big chunk of Europe also does not have great internet. Even in civilization, they don't have great internet. That people could download the images, once in a while, and then as long as they don't put that prefix part in, they can have a default configured somewhere, like in an environment variable, and then that image could be pulled locally, possibly.
Yeah. So we talked about tagging the images in curriculum, which we do tag syringe on the curriculum releases, but that's the only image that I saw that was tagged.
Nope.
So with the nightly builds, every night the utility. Sorry, go ahead.
The curriculum images are tagged as well. So syringe is part of the antidote platform, which is tagged totally separately. If you look at the so utility, like let's pick on utility for a second. Utility is part of the curriculum. It's defined in the curriculum repo. So it's built nightly, but it's also tagged per release. So there is a v1.0.0.0. Did I say that too many times? 1.0.0. There we go. And that's never going to change. That's done once.
On the lessons, I didn't see where the lessons use a tagged version.
They don't. You don't define that in the lesson definition. So what happens is in syringe, when we run syringe in production, what we do is we pass it an environment variable that says, hey, here's the version of the curriculum that you've loaded, and hopefully in the future I can even automate that because that metadata will be in the repo. But for now, I basically say there's an environment variable that says you're running the curriculum version 1.0.0, and it's available at this repo, at this branch, and so on and so forth. What syringe will do is when it starts a new image, it will clone. It will do a pull. When it starts a lesson, it looks at the images in that lesson definition. It will pull the image by reference that is in the lesson definition, but before it actually calls the pull, it will append a tag in code to the actual request. And so if you're running any lesson in self-medicate, for instance, and hopefully I believe that this is in the manifest. If it's not, it absolutely should be, that we're deploying syringe inside of self-medicate with that same environment variable, saying we're deploying version 1.0 of the curriculum, then you should only ever see that image pulled. Like, you should never see latest images pulled. If that's not the case, then we should fix that, because self-medicate's not meant to show the latest version of anything. It's meant to show released artifacts.
Okay, so we need to make that change. I do see, I was looking at the code, I see where it does append it if it's not Jupyter. If the string does not contain Jupyter, it adds the syringe config.curriculum version to the image reference. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not quite happy with that just yet, but the reason for what you just said, if memory serves, it's been a while, is the Jupyter Notebook image is actually, we consider that part of the platform, because that's sort of like a feature of the platform.
Yep.
So it's not like tightly bound to a or set of lessons. It's more just like, hey, here's some infrastructure that I need to spin up because this lesson requires the use of a Jupyter Notebook. So that image is actually managed as part of the antidote images. So that's probably why that's done.
Okay. So when we preload images in self-medicate, we're pulling down, like you said last week, the latest, and then we're having to go ahead and pull down those tagged version as well.
Yeah, and
so
in fact,
if they're
I'm looking at the syringe manifest, and it doesn't have that environment variable. So that's the fix. That's what we need to do, is tell syringe what version of the curriculum we're planning to load. I could have sworn I did this a while ago, but I just must be mistaken. But in any case, what that will do is it'll tell syringe, don't just pull the late, because it will pull the latest version without this. It defaults to that. But in my opinion,
it was pulling a new version every night of the utility VM.
Yeah, which
was annoying for me.
Yeah, no, that's not usable. I agree with that. And that's why I think it didn't trigger for me until now, because I figured that that we had things, the right environment variable in here properly, but it's not in there. Because what that'll do is it'll only pull that image once, because that image will never change. And so even the image pull policy is set to always, so it'll probably still do a pull, but it won't download anything, because it's not literally the checksum is identical.
Good. In that case, I can go ahead and preload the big images for now in the boxes, and maybe I could provide a box with the preloaded and maybe a box without the preloaded, if people are concerned about that. And then we're releasing a specific curriculum, a box for a specific curriculum version with a specific Minikube version and a specific K8 version. That all is working and tested on every machine,
Cool.
And I can't test VirtualBox 6.1 at the time, as Vagrant only supports 6.0, or they only support release versions of VirtualBox.
And you said you were still a little skeptical as to whether or not 6.1 is really going to solve the problem?
Correct. When reading the forums, they specify that the only supported configuration that VirtualBox will support is VirtualBox inside of VirtualBox. And someone was trying to get Hyper-V to work inside of VirtualBox, and they basically said, we're not going to support this at this time. 6.1 is the first release that introduces Intel support, and even then it's on select CPUs. So they call out the Broadwell version of the core series. Broadwell was I5 dot. I can't remember which one it was. But there's newer versions than Broadwell, and they say in the issue notes they say added additional support for other versions, but they don't specify versions. So it could be an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, circling back to this part's my fault, so I'll go take a peek at what we've got going on in production, and then just copy the relevant environment variables. That the curriculum version should be part of that, and I think that'll help solve this.
Okay.
Hopefully, at least short term.
I'll create an issue in a minute. Sorry for derailing the MP3.
No, it's okay.
That's it. I mean, no, yeah, that's totally fine. And actually, it's a byproduct of the fact that everything is kind of related in this project. There's no like isolated, like, oh, I've been working on this thing. It's like nobody's relying on it, and nobody might be interested. That doesn't exist. Like every single piece of work that's going on right now is a dependency of somebody else's work.
All right. That's depressing to hear about VirtualBox. But it is what it is. And I've done nested virtualization with other hypervisors inside of VirtualBox, specifically QEMU, and without an issue. In the past, I know I've done that at least once. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with 6.1.
Yeah, and it's 64-bit. The issue is 64-bit within the QEMU may not be supported. So you can run 32-bit images or 32-bit VMs inside of a hypervisor, but running 64-bit requires the nested VTX, and VirtualBox has not supported that until version 5.2, is it? And they haven't supported it on Intel until 6.1, which isn't out yet. But VMware has supported that for the last 10 years.
With 64-bit?
Just what you get with getting free versus paid.
Yeah, some hypervisors don't even support 32-bit. You have to do 64-bit. So, okay. Let's move on. Matt, you have updates on the new Entry Labs documentation.
Nothing to show beyond what was in last week. I mean, I think last week, given that it was a holiday week, I might have added some to it, but it's mostly unchanged. I think probably next week, or maybe the week after. I'm doing a little traveling soon, so we'll see. But sometime in the next few weeks, I'll probably have something to show. The same plan is there. Basically, it's a Gitbook site. You guys all saw it. It's docs.nrelabs.io. It's back-ended by a new repo, so it's going to be effective. It's Markdown, so it's basically all totally new files, which I think will be good. I think most folks last week were in agreement that restructured text is just kind of like meh, which I would agree with. It's very capable. It's actually I equate it to Emacs a little bit. But no, it's going well. So basically, yeah, I mean, in the next few weeks, what I'd like to do is get to the point where it's basically done. And effectively, once we switch the site over, which is still a work in progress, we got to figure out this week to see where things are at with that. But basically, at any time, we will be ready to start directing folks to it. but hopefully not before we go live with the new domain, because they're all kind of bundled. But regardless, I think there will be a point where everybody can see, everybody here on the call can provide feedback as to whether or not the new documentation is up to snuff and whatnot. I mean, you can technically do that now. It's all live and it's all being done, in its own repo. But I'll do a more or less a formal presentation of it, I think, in the next few weeks, and then we can do some more or less formal feedback. But same rule applies. It's public, but it's also not super like formally launched. So just keep it to yourself for now. And if you have feedback, just send it to me or Toad or somebody else in the forums. But yeah, that's it for now. I'll probably have more to show, I think, in the next few weeks.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the rollout of the new site and kind of what the thinking is there? Yeah,
sure. There's a part. In fact, I think another point in the agenda that I added. I'm asking for feedback on the replacement plan for guacamole. I should really not have a question mark there because people have provided feedback, which is good. Both Stephen and Olivier have chimed in. That's part of it. That's a sort of a subset of the work that needs done. So zooming out a little bit, basically, the structure of the new site is there. But right now, the Enery Labs application is still, sort of separate. So the idea is that at the end of this effort, what we'll have is we'll still have Antidote Web. Obviously, that'll stick around, but it'll be different. The way that it's presented will be a little bit different. The way that the application is changing a little bit will be that all of the different elements within Antidote Web will be like widgetized. Is the scientific term. So basically, if you imagine the different components that make up the site, that make up like the platform, actually, will be broken up into their not quite iframes, but similarly portable components. So like the lesson interface, like how do you interact with a lesson, the lesson catalog, the advisor, the things like that. All of those will be broken up into sort of modular components and effectively installed directly on the new site, which is actually running in Hugo. Now that it was very important, I'm continuing to reinforce this with the developers that we're working with. Obviously, we can't do that to the point where people that are not running the Enery Labs site can't use Antidote Web. That's obviously not what we want to do. So what we'll be doing also is effectively replacing the existing pages within Antidote Web, and there's still going to be pages within Antidote Web. We just won't use them in production because we're going to be embedding those sort of components directly in our own pages. But there will be sort of very very plain sample sort of looking pages that are going to be served with Antidote Web, and so if you wanted to run this on like your own site, you would just simply have to do the same thing we're doing in production. But you'll still have a usable Antidote Web at the end of it on its own. You'll still be able to use it on its own. It may just look a little less pretty just because it won't have any styling around it. It'll just be a very, very simple. It'll basically just be a husk, like a very simple holder for those widgets. If you're just working with self-medicate, for instance, that's what you'll get. So that's the goal. The first part of that, which is just building effectively, rebuilding the site that we currently have in Hugo, is done, which is awesome. But we want to integrate the whole thing. There's actually a non-trivial amount of work that's required to sort of do it halfway. So rather than just launch the new site, I think it's important to make the changes to Antidote Web that we need, and then go forward that way. So that's what we're currently waiting on. In addition to paperwork on our side to facilitate those changes, another one of the big decisions was how to implement the new terminal, which is what I covered in the replacing guacamole design doc. It sounds like there's fairly overwhelming support for the changes, which is good. Please keep the feedback coming though. If you have any, I'll obviously update everybody when we do proceed with some of these changes and we do some testing. We'll probably get some of you folks involved with that, I'm sure. But yeah, I wasn't expecting necessarily any controversy, but it was good. It was just good to see that there's that everybody, pretty much everybody, supports replacing guacamole, which I think is good. I think it's a good thing. I think it's time.
Okay. We'll go on to the next item. How's it going, Olivier?
Fine, thank you. I'm sorry, I was in a meeting with my students working on KubeVirt, so I was late.
No worries. Okay, so does anyone have feedback on the MP1 draft? Has anyone reviewed it?
I've looked into it. I have like a local instance of Antidote up. I am starting to look into MP13, like the Antidote starts. For now, I'll just use like a mock data, but I should have something functional in the next 2 weeks or so.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit on the forums, especially since last week. I mean, I was watching some old videos, and I remember you popping up before on earlier stand-ups, but last week, yeah, we basically started talking about MP1. So just for those that aren't super familiar with MP1, with the changes that we're going to be doing in Syringe, the very first step is to sort of re-implement a new database package. So, well, not implement, because there is no database package. So that doesn't exist, but it needs to. And that's going to do all of the state management for us. So there's going to be definitions loaded in there, and then of course state management of like what lessons are running where and things like that. Currently, the way that we report statistics is just basically I found a corner of the API package to throw some InfluxDB code in, and there it is. Obviously, that's not great. So going forward, what we're going to do is have a totally separate service, as with most things that are being broken out. It'll be a totally separate service whose job it is just to simply look at the database and export statistics about it. So it's going to look at the database and see, oh, we've got 5 lessons loaded, and they're running these, or we've got 5 running lessons, and they're running these lesson IDs with these names and whatever other data we want to export. Probably building on the work that's being done today, but also probably, I would imagine, rethinking the metrics that we do export, because I didn't really put a ton of thought into that. It just kind of works. The problem with that, of course, is that you need to be able to communicate with the database in order to get that data. So yeah, what Johannes is referencing is correct. We in order to parallelize this work effectively, everything other than the database calls will need to be done. Can be done, but the database calls themselves will just need to be mocked until I finish with MP1.1, which is the very first step. So that is how it's going. But I'm excited. I'm excited that Johannes is getting involved with this, and I'm also excited that I'm excited, a little jealous that the first service breakout is being done by Johannes, but it just makes me work faster. So that's good.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Do we have any feedback on the guacamole replacement plan? I do. I cannot wait for it to happen.
I'm not sure if anybody saw the details there, but the WebSSH2 project, which we're going to be cannibalizing is not the right word, but we're not going to be using the whole thing. We're just going to be using a single part of it. But I submitted a PR to enhance the security of that project, and it was accepted within like a day. So I haven't tried contributing to Guacamole, but I can't imagine that it would be that easy, given that it's an Apache project. So.
So is this about external.js?
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. I mean, web. So basically, in a nutshell, the web SSH2 thing that I link to is more of just like a reference implementation of a bunch of different things, including Xterm.js.
Because I was just wondering which link you're referring to.
Probably, I think early on in the proposal that I linked to in the meeting notes. So if you go to the weekly stand-up, December 3rd, and it says feedback on guacamole replacement plan.
Yeah.
And then there's a link at the end that says, I drew up this document. So it's basically the blueprint for replacing guacamole.
Okay, yeah. I was looking at the pull request at the end. Okay.
Yeah. If you click the link earlier than that, it'll be a little more readable.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, so basically, if you look at WebSSH2, that project that under that gentleman's username, I can't remember what his name is. Basically, what it is it's just it's a very bare bones reference implementation for how this could work, because Xterm.js on its own doesn't have an equivalent to what we currently rely on for proxying connections, which is actually a combination of guacd and the guacamole Tomcat servlet. Which is in itself fairly complex because it introduces this new thing called the guacamole protocol, which I never really understood why they did that, but that's okay. Anyway, Xterm.js doesn't have anything like that built in. So what WebSSH2 does is it implements its own as a Node.js application using a library called Socket.io, which is extremely popular for real-time applications, especially like chat applications. Pretty sure one of the really popular Electron-based kind of doodads uses it. I'm thinking Slack, but that might be too much. I'm not sure. And they may have replaced it since then. They may used to have been on it. In any case, it's just a really fast real-time service kind of library thing. And what they're doing is they're using it to provide WebSocket connectivity to Xterm.js in much the same way that we're doing that with guacamole today. Now, the cool thing about this, there's actually a few cool things about this. The current, now this isn't mandatory in guacamole. I do believe there's a way to use WebSockets, but we're currently not using WebSockets, which means that literally every keystroke is its own HTTP request. And you can imagine that the performance of that is not ideal, especially on mobile connections, which we have had demonstrated to us by myself. I've demonstrated it to myself, and then our web developer was like, "Hey, you guys know this really sucks right now, right?" And so that was one of the things that kicked this off. Anyway, in general, moving to WebSockets is a good direction. Technically, that's possible in guacamole, but to be honest, the documentation for guacamole in that area is a little bit of a train wreck. And also, this new architecture with Socket.io makes it effectively mandatory. It's just the way that it works. So if you're not familiar with WebSockets, you can kind of think of it as like a stream instead of a request, an RPC kind of thing. So it's the connection is always open, and it's only sending effectively the small amount of information that needs to be sent along that connection. So it's a lot more efficient. Socket.io is also written in JavaScript, and actually the whole backend proxy function is written in JavaScript. I have night sweats about Node.js, but I think in this case it's actually a really good call because it makes basically the end-to-end solution one language, which I think is really good for maintainability. We've actually got folks that are interested in contributing to Antidote Web that today view the whole guacamole stack as a little bit of a black box, and that's not good because that's a core component to the web app. So we've got to make it more accessible to folks that are otherwise just pure play web developers. Anyway, I'm rambling. Obviously, the whole point of this blueprint was to put all of my rambling words into coherent things. And I appreciate the feedback that I have gotten. So Stephen and Olivia have both commented. Like I said, it sounds like there's pretty good support for the change in general. So I'll assume that we're good in general to move forward, but I don't know that we're going to be able to do that in the next week or two in terms of getting our the web company that we're working with. So I'll keep you updated if we do make progress there. And of course, if there's any specific questions or concerns on any of the details in the blueprint, you can provide that anytime. None of this is set in stone, even if we do start the work. So just chime in and let us know what you think. Bill Church. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, Bill Church is the guy that made WebSSH2.
What was it? Web what?
WebSSH2. It's in the blueprint.
Oh, sorry.
When I was looking at External.js the other day, it looked like there are so many people trying to use that library, and I'm afraid there could be another gang of people trying to reinvent the same platform as we are doing currently. But I guess that's our fate, that maybe someone is doing another kind of cloud-based learning labs, something.
Oh,
But
I'm
there's
sure they are. Yeah.
so many people trying to put web consoles and stuff like that. So
Yep. Yeah, I'm sure they are. And for me, I think this change is actually just about aligning with them. I think what this says is the value, while having a web browser, or while having a terminal in the browser is obviously very cool and certainly helps facilitate the the goal of the project to make this learning a lot easier. I don't think that's our unique value proposition. I don't think it ever was. So I think
yes.
moving to Xterm.js just makes that part a little bit more of a commodity. Because again, the thing I think we're optimizing for here, the thing that we need to optimize for is bringing more folks on to be able to maintain the platform. And we're not going to get there if we have, if we're effectively doing our own thing for very little reason.
Sure. By the way, I mentioned, I think, in the forum that I am currently trying to recruit students of mine to work on integration of an IDE like Eclipse Theia or Eclipse Che. So don't expect much work, but by accident, we could have some useful contribution.
Sure. Yeah, and in fact, I meant to bring up one thing that Derek and I were talking about probably months ago at this point was a feature that we'll probably have to circle back to after MP1. But right now, the way that files are managed inside of, if you have a, like Python scripts or anything else that you might want to be able to edit using like an IDE or something like that, those files are actually stored inside container volumes that are mounted to each endpoint individually. So that means if you change, if there's a file in the lesson directory and you change it in one of your endpoints while you're running the lesson, then if there's another lesson that has the same lesson, or if there's another image that has this endpoint that has the same lesson directory cloned, it won't actually have that change because they're totally isolated. So one thing that we were talking about a while back, and like I said, I think this will be the thing that makes it much more palatable for us to have an IDE within each lesson, is building effectively a scratch directory. So instead of having init containers that clone the Git repo, once every single endpoint, we can just do that once for the entire lesson, and they all just mount into that. All the endpoints just mount into that, and that way you can actually have an IDE as a tab, as if it was its own endpoint. And then when you edit files within that environment, that's live for all of the other endpoints. So any like utility image that's looking at that, like they're all going to have a view into that scratch directory. I can't remember. I think I drew up a blueprint on that, but I can't. I know that I haven't touched it in probably months. But in terms of when you brought that up, I was like, oh man, we definitely need to get that scratch directory in place, because that's going to be a make or break kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, I saw that scratch directory blueprint earlier today, and you brought up the exact case point that I was having an issue. Is I built a Thea browser inside of a Antidote container. It uses Thea, it launches Thea, but has Nginx in order to route the syringe ref URL into so you can access the
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Antidote web, can access the web page.
Yeah.
syringe URL ref, whatever it is. But when I would edit a change in the antidote, I wouldn't see the change on the utility VM. And so that killed my idea for a lesson, and I scratched. I did not make any more progress.
Keep in mind
So
that
I
there's
scratched
still
originally.
not that many people using the HTTP presentation type. So if you do have concerns there, like if there's something that doesn't work that you think could work better, or any issues that you're having, just let me know, please, because we've had this feature, present for a while at this point, but not many lessons are making use of it. So if you're playing around with it and you run into issues, just please let me know, because I'm kind of hungry for folks to use that and make it more palatable. It could be it could be that the way I'm doing pathing is just not great. I only had a few use cases in mind when I built that.
The pathing part is the hardest piece, I would say, with it. Is, for instance, Thea has its own URL that it wants you to access at this path.
Yeah, Jupyter's the same way.
Yeah. So I had to run Nginx on top of my image in order to rewrite the URL, do URL rewrite, which was complicated, but I got work. That's easily extendable to other images, but it's another layer of complexity.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would do it without the URL rewrite. Without the syringe full ref, but
that's something that can be changed if you know enough of Thea, maybe. I haven't checked myself, so.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, like I said, my goal with that is there a way that we can make it as easy as possible on the endpoint builder, meaning the people building the images, so that they don't have to do what you did with doing Nginx and doing your own configuration. Obviously that will work, but it would be nice if that wasn't necessary. On the other hand, I also don't really want to. I like the fact that the presentation type is just set to HTTP and everything else is intuitive. Like I don't want to pass a bunch of Nginx rewrite rules into leak it into the lesson definition abstraction. I don't think that will be fun for anybody. So I think we've just got to figure out a good UX for that. If that's possible, if we can keep those two things in balance, that would be ideal. Because then the user, then the person that's defining the lesson doesn't have to worry about effectively redirect rules at any layer. I think it's equally as cumbersome if they have to manage Nginx rules in the lesson definition as it is if they may have to manage it in their own image. Neither are ideal.
Right.
So yeah, I think I just think that I need more eyes. I think
maybe that can be done as part of the provisioning layer using Ansible. And I was curious if there was a way, and we don't need this answered, but one thing that I was trying to do was have Nginx as its own instance, its own VM, and then the Thea could be a different VM, for instance. And then you make simple Ansible playbooks to change the variables. Like instead of writing the complex rewrite rule, I just say I want to access Thea, /Thea.
Maybe. Yeah. Well, this will probably need to be something we write up, I'd imagine.
We're 5 minutes from the top of the hour. And I'm going to need to hop off at the top of the hour. Did you guys get a chance to talk at all about governance issues last time?
We have not.
Okay. So to give everyone an update, we we heard back from the Software Freedom Conservancy, and they let us know that they are redoing their entire application process, and therefore they are not considering any applications at this time. And they don't expect to resume considering applications until about February. We spoke to our resident licensing and foundation expert. She kind of went through the various options with us and kind of, you know, basically ruled them all out, other than the Software Freedom Conservancy. So at this point, our game plan is to talk with the folks that we were originally working with in terms of you know, moving forward with becoming joint sponsors, and talking with them to see what they would need. There is a for-profit option as well, which is not ideal. But if it's simply a question of having, you know, a place to park money, and that's what needs to happen for folks to feel comfortable with signing on, that might be what we do in the near term. So that's where things stand. Any questions? All right.
I mean, this is hugely disappointing. I mean,
Yeah.
I saw some of their wording in the email, and I guess I don't understand what the purpose of that conservancy is, right? They're becoming what I like to call a self-licking ice cream cone. They don't want to help open source projects unless the open source projects are serving this conservancy's interests.
Well, that's true of any and all.
That's a mandatory requirement if you want to be able to go to a court and defend those projects. You have to be a
Yep.
party, I guess. So
Yep.
if you don't
Yeah, but you
leave
have
those
to-
projects, you can't host them. I mean, somehow.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer, but
Sure, I understand that concept, but the way it was worded was not framed legally. It was like, you know, how is your project going to make us better? Was there, and the question is, how does any project make the conservancy better? It seems arbitrary and subjective what that means, and I was just not a fan of their response. That's all. I can't imagine how we would detract from their purpose. That, I guess that's it. That's all I got. You know, they get funding. And then they help us, right? I mean, beyond that, I'm trying to understand what would be in their, how we could not be in their interest, barring obvious things like, you know, the software we're making is unethical or something like that.
So there's I can give a whole long lesson on how foundations work and how they make their decisions, but we are at the top of the hour, so perhaps next week we can go into that in more detail if people are interested.
I am.
Fair enough. Put it on the agenda for next week then.
it would be interesting to have a kind of a record of that conversation in the forum,
Okay.
if possible.
Sure.
Or in between, planning the next meetup.
Sure. All right, I need to hop to my next meeting, folks. So I will talk to you all later.
Okay.
All right.
I just had one point, maybe just to mention that next week I'll be talking about Antidote and or NRE Labs in Paris, if you remember.
Yes.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Sorry?
Good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try to make a demonstration if the technique is not it with me. And for the slides, I borrowed maths mainly. So the discourse will be different, but the slides at least should be similar.
Cool. Yeah. If there's anything we can do in the week leading up, just let us know.
I guess I'm fine, except that we have a huge strikes planned in France as usual. But so I don't know if it will be a problem for the attendance, but we'll see.
Oh.
All right. Well, if there's we're at the top of the hour. If there's no other business, then we'll call it. Does anyone have anything? All right. Time of death is 11:02 a.m. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. See you next
Thank
week.
you.
Thank you.